Her ex-mate invited her to watch him marry another Luna. She walked in with the Alpha King. Before we begin, imagine this. Somewhere in a forgotten corner of the kingdom, a gentle Omega is about to make a choice that no one else would make. While others choose fear, she chooses kindness. While others walk away, she stays. Because in this world, kindness is never weakness. It is the beginning of every legend. Sometimes, the smallest act of compassion can change a destiny in ways no one could ever imagine. If you love emotional Alpha King and Omega stories where kindness is stronger than power, loyalty is worth more than pride, and forgotten Omegas become legends, you've found the perfect place. Please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. The cruelest invitation Serena Mercer ever received arrived wrapped in gold, sealed with the family crest of the man who had once promised she would never face another winter alone. Now, back to Serena Mercer. Snow drifted quietly across Greyhaven Pack, softening rooftops and frozen paths that still carried memories Serena wished winter could bury forever. She stood outside the small stone cottage she shared with her Aunt Rosalie, turning the elegant cream-colored envelope between trembling fingers. Even before breaking the crimson wax, she recognized the Whitmore family crest. For one impossible heartbeat, she imagined a different future. An apology, a mistake finally corrected. The illusion lasted only until she unfolded the invitation. Written in flawless script was the announcement of Gavin Whitmore's marriage to Brielle Langston, the woman destined to become Greyhaven's next Luna. Serena forced herself to keep reading until she reached the final line. Unlike the carefully printed invitation, these words had been written by hand. She recognized Gavin's handwriting immediately, the same confident strokes that had once filled letters promising forever. Asterisk, I hope you'll attend. You deserve to witness what a true Luna looks like. Asterisk, the words hurt more because they sounded exactly like his voice. Her fingers tightened around the paper until the edges bent beneath her grip, but after one slow breath, she carefully smoothed them flat again. She refused to let even a piece of paper witness her breaking apart. The memory she had spent an entire year trying to silence returned without mercy. Beneath the sacred moon altar, Gavin had looked into her tear-filled eyes as the elders dissolved their mate bond. He had not shouted. He had not apologized. He had simply chosen ambition over love, turning away while the ancient ritual left a thin silver scar across her wrist and a wound no healer could ever reach. Rosalie opened the cottage door and stopped the moment she saw Serena's face. She did not ask what had happened. She quietly accepted the invitation, read the handwritten sentence, then closed her eyes for a brief moment before folding the paper with careful hands. He wanted you to feel the rejection twice, she said softly. Serena lowered her gaze. Once wasn't enough. Rosalie reached for her niece's hand. No, someone wanted to convince you that you were never enough. Outside, Greyhaven overflowed with excitement. Silver banners carrying the Whitmore crest fluttered above crowded streets, while merchants prepared for the grand wedding celebration. Whenever Serena passed, conversations faded into uneasy whispers. Some people looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with quiet pity, as though heartbreak had become another ordinary spectacle. Serena acknowledged none of them. Every steady step she took was an act of quiet resistance against the humiliation others expected to see written across her face. Back inside the cottage, she escaped into the tiny healing room lined with dried herbs gathered years earlier beside her late mother. She reached instinctively for lavender and mountain sage, allowing familiar work to steady her breathing. Around her neck rested the silver laurel pendant her mother had treasured, the one reminder that before she had ever been someone's rejected mate, she had simply been Serena, a healer whose worth had never depended on another person's choice. She wrapped her fingers around the pendant and whispered into the stillness. I don't know if I should go, but I won't let someone else's decision become the rest of my story. Evening settled over Greyhaven, carrying with it a silence that finally slowed her racing heart. Then frantic pounding shattered the calm. The cottage door burst open, and a frightened messenger stumbled inside, snow covering his shoulders as panic overtook every breath. Miss Mercer, he gasped, struggling to remain standing. There's a man dying on the northern forest road. And if you don't come now, no one else will. Serena did not waste a single heartbeat. She grabbed her weathered satchel, filled it with clean bandages, willow bark, dried yarrow, and a small glass bottle of pain tincture before following the exhausted messenger into the freezing night. Snow covered the narrow forest trail in an untouched blanket that reflected the pale moonlight, while icy wind slipped through the towering pines with a lonely whisper. The young courier stumbled ahead, explaining between uneven breaths that several merchants had discovered an unconscious traveler beside the northern road, but every healer in the nearby settlement had refused to leave after sunset because wolves had been heard roaming the hills. Serena answered only with a quiet nod. Fear had never stopped her from answering someone in need. By the time they reached the clearing, most of the frightened merchants had retreated behind their wagons. Only one lantern still burned beside the fallen stranger. He was larger than any man Serena had ever treated, dressed in a dark travel cloak now soaked with melting snow and blood. A deep slash crossed his shoulder, while another wound along his ribs suggested a carefully aimed blade rather than the claws of a beast. Whoever had attacked him had intended to kill, not hunt. His face remained partly hidden beneath damp strands of black hair. Yet even unconscious, he carried an unmistakable air of command. Serena knelt beside him without hesitation. She pressed 2 fingers gently against his neck and released a quiet breath of relief when she found a slow but steady pulse. "Help me move him beneath the trees," she said. The merchants exchanged uneasy glances. One older man shook his head. "Leave him. Whoever did this may still be nearby." Serena looked up calmly. "If we abandon him now, we become part of what nearly killed him." Ashamed, 2 men stepped forward to help lift the stranger onto a bed of pine branches sheltered from the wind. She cleaned the injuries with melted snow before grinding herbs into a thick paste. The stranger never cried out, although every tightening muscle betrayed tremendous pain. As Serena wrapped fresh linen around his shoulder, his hand suddenly closed around her wrist. His silver eyes opened with startling intensity, sharp enough to make several merchants step backward. Even weakened, there was something ancient inside that gaze, something disciplined rather than savage. Instinct warned him to distrust everyone around him, yet his attention settled entirely on the woman tending his wounds. "You're safe," Serena whispered before he could force himself upright. "Don't move. You'll reopen everything." He studied her silently, as though measuring whether kindness itself could be trusted. Finally his grip loosened. "Why help a stranger?" His voice was deep, roughened by blood loss, carrying quiet authority despite exhaustion. Serena continued fastening the bandage. "Because someone once taught me that compassion shouldn't depend on a person's name." The answer lingered between them longer than either expected. For the first time, the tension inside his expression eased. Most people would have walked away. A faint smile touched Serena's lips, gentle but tired. Most people haven't learned what it feels like when everyone else walks away first. Neither spoke again for several moments. Snowflakes drifted onto the stranger's cloak before melting against the lingering heat of his body. As Serena prepared another dressing, his breathing suddenly changed. His jaw clenched, every tendon in his neck tightening beneath the skin. A low growl escaped his chest. Not human, not entirely. The horses tied to the nearby wagons reared violently. The merchants stumbled back in panic. Serena felt the invisible weight of something powerful pressing against the clearing, wild and restrained at the same time. Whatever lived inside this man was struggling desperately for control. Without thinking, she rested one steady hand over his uninjured arm and spoke in the same soothing tone she had once used for frightened wolf pups brought into her mother's healing room. "Easy," she murmured. "You don't have to fight alone tonight." To everyone's astonishment, the terrible pressure slowly faded. His breathing steadied. The dangerous light behind his silver eyes softened until only weary gratitude remained. Before Serena could wonder how such a simple gesture had calmed him, the thunder of galloping horses echoed through the forest. Moments later, a dozen armored riders burst into the clearing, their cloaks marked with the silver-crowned wolf of the royal household. Every sword pointed outward in perfect formation as one broad-shouldered commander dismounted and froze the instant he saw the wounded stranger sitting beside Serena. Then, without hesitation, every armored warrior dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," the commander said, lowering his head, "We've finally found you." The forest fell into absolute silence. Even the restless horses stopped stamping their hooves as every armored warrior bowed before the injured man Serena had treated with nothing more than clean bandages and quiet compassion. She looked from the silver-crowned wolf embroidered across their cloaks to the stranger sitting against the pine trunk, his steady gaze never leaving hers. The realization settled slowly, almost too large to believe. This was King Uriah Ashford, the Alpha King whose authority reached every pack across the Northern Territories. Yet he wore no crown, only blood-stained clothing and exhaustion that no title could disguise. Caleb Monroe, commander of the Royal Guard, rose first and hurried forward, concern breaking through the discipline etched across his face. "Your Majesty, we tracked the assassins as far as the Eastern Ridge. We feared." His voice caught as he noticed the fresh bandages carefully secured over Uriah's wounds. "A healer found me before my enemies did," Uriah answered evenly. His eyes shifted toward Serena. She refused to abandon a stranger. Caleb turned to her, surprise replacing suspicion. "You knew nothing of who he was?" Serena shook her head. "I only knew someone needed help." For a long moment the commander studied her expression, searching for any sign of deception. He found none. Instead, he gave a respectful incline of his head that Serena never expected from a royal officer. The remaining guards immediately spread through the surrounding woods, collecting broken arrows and examining footprints left beneath the fresh snowfall. Uriah accepted Caleb's arm as he stood, though every careful movement betrayed the pain still pulling across his ribs. Serena instinctively stepped closer, adjusting the bandage that had shifted beneath his cloak. "You're not ready for a long ride," she said quietly. "The bleeding has stopped, but the deeper injury hasn't." Caleb hesitated. "We must return to the royal fortress before dawn." "If you force him into the saddle now," Serena replied without raising her voice, "you may arrive with a king who cannot survive the journey." None of the soldiers challenged her. Uriah regarded her with thoughtful calm before speaking. "We'll remain until sunrise." The decision settled every argument at once. A small camp was established beneath the sheltering pines. While the guards maintained watch, Serena prepared another herbal mixture over a modest fire. Uriah observed the practiced confidence in her hands, noticing how every movement reflected years of quiet service rather than formal recognition. "Who taught you?" he asked after a comfortable silence had settled between them. Serena stirred the steaming herbs before answering. "My mother." She believed healing was never about earning gratitude. It was about making sure another family didn't lose someone they loved. A shadow crossed Uriah's features. A rare belief. She offered him the warm cup. Rare things are still worth protecting. He accepted it, his fingers briefly brushing hers before the moment passed. Neither acknowledged the strange stillness that lingered afterward. As the fire crackled, Caleb returned carrying a leather satchel recovered near the attack site. Inside lay a broken dagger marked with the faded crest of a mercenary guild known for selling loyalty to the highest bidder. Uriah examined the weapon only briefly before closing the satchel again. "Someone wanted this to appear as ordinary bandit work," he said. It wasn't. Serena understood enough not to press further. Whatever danger had followed him into the forest clearly reached far beyond Greyhaven. Dawn slowly painted silver across the snow-covered branches. The royal horses were prepared, and Uriah's strength had returned enough for travel. Before mounting, he faced Serena once more. "There is something I owe you besides my life." She gently shook her head. "You owe me nothing. You're mistaken." From inside his cloak, he withdrew a folded parchment bearing the royal seal and handed it to her. "Read it after I've gone." Confused, Serena accepted the document without breaking the wax. Uriah's expression remained composed, yet there was unmistakable purpose behind his next words. "Tell me honestly, what weighs on your thoughts more heavily than the storm we escaped?" She hesitated, then drew a slow breath. "Someone I once trusted has invited me to watch him marry another woman." Caleb's jaw tightened, sensing insult before hearing the details. Uriah listened without interruption until she finished describing the invitation and the humiliation hidden inside its elegant words. He remained silent for several moments, his gaze fixed on the endless white horizon beyond the trees. At last he spoke with quiet certainty. "No citizen under my protection should ever be summoned simply to have their dignity destroyed." Serena lowered her eyes, unsure how to answer. Then Uriah stepped closer, his voice calm enough to sound almost ordinary despite the weight of the offer. When that day arrives, you will not have to walk through those doors alone. Serena remained beneath the frost-covered pines long after the royal riders disappeared beyond the northern ridge, the sealed parchment resting in her hands with surprising weight. She finally broke the crimson wax only after returning home, expecting a formal note of thanks. Instead, she found a decree bearing King Uriah Ashford's signature, granting her unrestricted access to any royal healer's outpost should she ever require assistance in the service of another life. It was not wealth, land, or status. It was trust. Rosalie read the document twice before looking at her niece with quiet concern. Kings do not hand out privileges like this without seeing something extraordinary. Serena carefully folded the parchment and slipped it beside the silver laurel pendant that had belonged to her mother. He was grateful, nothing more. Yet even as she spoke, she remembered the certainty in Uriah's final promise. The thought unsettled her because it stirred something she had spent a year trying to silence: hope. The following days swept Greyhaven into restless celebration. Workers draped the town square with silver banners. Musicians rehearsed outside the ceremonial hall, and visiting nobles began arriving from neighboring packs. Everywhere Serena turned, preparations reminded her that Gavin's wedding had become the most anticipated gathering in years. She avoided the crowded streets whenever possible, spending her hours treating elderly villagers, tending injured children, and preparing herbal remedies for the coming winter. Healing had always been the only place where the world stopped asking her to measure her worth against someone else's expectations. That fragile peace shattered when Marjorie Whitmore arrived unannounced at the cottage. Dressed in immaculate velvet trimmed with white fox fur, the future mother-in-law of Greyhaven's new Luna stepped inside, without waiting to be invited. Her polished smile never reached her eyes. "I simply wish to ensure my invitation reached you," she said, placing another envelope upon the wooden table. "My son would be disappointed if his former mate failed to attend such an important occasion." Serena did not touch it. The first invitation was received. Marjorie's gaze drifted across the modest room before settling on Serena once again. "Good. Then everyone will witness how gracefully you've accepted your place." After she departed, silence lingered like smoke. Rosalie's expression hardened. "She didn't come to invite you. She came to see whether you were still wounded." Serena stared at the unopened envelope. Maybe she found her answer. That evening she walked alone beyond the village where snow blanketed the quiet hills. She carried the second invitation only because throwing it away somehow felt like surrendering control over a chapter she desperately wanted to close. As twilight settled across the valley, she stopped beside the old moonstone where she and Gavin had once exchanged childish promises long before destiny had named them mates. Nothing remained except fading carvings nearly hidden beneath ice. She realized then that she no longer missed the future she had imagined with him. What continued hurting was the belief he had tried to leave behind, that she had never been enough. A familiar sound interrupted her thoughts. Hoofbeats approached steadily along the frozen path. Caleb Monroe reined in his horse a respectful distance away before dismounting. He carried no drawn weapon, only a sealed message bearing the royal crest. "His Majesty asked that this be delivered personally," he said. Serena accepted the letter with quiet surprise. Inside was only a single sentence written in strong, unmistakable handwriting. Asterisk, no one should ever mistake endurance for weakness. Asterisk, before she could fully absorb the words, Caleb spoke again. "The king has accepted an official invitation to attend the Whitmore wedding." Serena looked up in astonishment. Greyhaven has never hosted the Alpha King. "It wasn't planning to," Caleb replied evenly. His Majesty changed the schedule himself. Her heartbeat quickened as countless possibilities rushed through her mind. "Why?" The commander held her gaze for a brief moment before answering with complete honesty. "Because you asked for nothing. And that is precisely why he intends to stand where justice has been absent." As Caleb rode away beneath the darkening sky, Serena remained motionless, the letter trembling faintly between her fingers. For the first time since Gavin's rejection, she understood that walking into the wedding was no longer a question of surviving humiliation. It had become a choice that could change every life waiting inside that ceremonial hall. The morning of Gavin Whitmore's wedding arrived beneath a pale winter sky, yet Greyhaven stirred with restless excitement long before sunrise. Lanterns lined every street leading to the ceremonial hall. Evergreen garlands framed stone archways, and elegant carriages rolled through the village carrying visiting alphas, elders, and influential families eager to witness the alliance that would strengthen the pack's future. Serena watched the preparations from the cottage window, in complete silence. A year earlier, she would have imagined herself standing where Brielle now stood. Today, she felt neither envy nor longing. What weighed upon her was something far heavier. The fear that walking into that hall might reopen wounds she had finally begun to survive. Rosalie set a warm cup beside her and rested one gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go," she said quietly. Serena stared through the frost-covered glass. "If I stay here, maybe they'll finally forget me." Rosalie shook her head. "No," after a long pause. She added the words Serena would carry for the rest of her life. "If you stay home today, Gavin will still be deciding where you belong." The sentence struck deeper than any comfort ever could. Serena slowly lowered her eyes, realizing that every choice she had made since the broken mate bond had been shaped by someone else's cruelty. If she hid, she would not be protecting her heart. She would simply be allowing the past to keep speaking for her. Before either woman could say another word, the sound of approaching horses echoed outside. A royal carriage stopped before the cottage, surrounded by members of the royal guard in polished black armor trimmed with silver. Curious neighbors emerged from nearby homes, their whispers spreading almost instantly through the quiet street. Caleb Monroe stepped down first and approached the doorway with respectful composure. "Miss Mercer," he said, inclining his head, "His Majesty requests the honor of speaking with you before the ceremony." Less than an hour later, Serena entered a secluded hunting lodge overlooking the snow-covered valley. King Uriah Ashford stood near the broad windows, dressed in formal black with the silver-crowned wolf embroidered across his cloak. Although every detail reflected the dignity of a ruler, he greeted her exactly as he had in the forest, with calm gratitude rather than distance. "Thank you for coming," he said. Serena offered a small smile. Commander Monroe made it sound difficult to refuse. A hint of amusement crossed Uriah's face before fading into quiet sincerity. "Then let me make something perfectly clear." He stepped no closer than courtesy allowed. "If you choose not to attend the wedding, no one under my command will question your decision." Serena searched his expression. There was no expectation hidden behind his words. No pressure, no pity, only respect. "But if I do go," she asked softly, "what changes?" Uriah answered without hesitation. "Nothing about your worth. Only who gets to witness it." The room fell silent. Those simple words untangled something inside her that months of solitude never could. She reached into her satchel and withdrew the faded mate ring she had carried since the day Gavin rejected her. For nearly a year she had been unable to leave it behind, not because she still loved him, but because letting go meant accepting that the life she imagined would never exist. She closed her fingers around the worn silver one final time before placing it inside a small linen pouch. "I'm finished carrying yesterday," she whispered. Uriah did not congratulate her. He simply nodded, honoring the weight of the choice she had made for herself. Moments later, Caleb entered with quiet urgency. "Your Majesty," he announced, "Greyhaven has gathered. Elder Tobias is preparing to begin the ceremony." Uriah turned toward Serena and extended his arm, not as a command, not as a rescue, but as an invitation she remained completely free to refuse. She looked once toward the door leading back to the safety of everything familiar. Then she remembered Rosalie's words. Gavin no longer had the right to decide where she belonged. With calm certainty, Serena lifted her head, placed her hand upon Uriah's arm, and together they stepped into the waiting carriage. As the horses carried them toward Greyhaven, there was no path leading back to the woman who had once accepted humiliation in silence. Ahead waited the doors that had been prepared to shame her. Instead, they were about to witness the moment her future chose her back. The great doors of Greyhaven's ceremonial hall were already closing when a deep blast of royal trumpets rolled across the courtyard, stopping the celebration as completely as if time itself had frozen. Conversations vanished. Musicians lowered their instruments. Every face turned toward the entrance. "Who's arriving?" someone whispered. "Another alpha? Another guest?" Before anyone could answer, the massive oak doors swung open once more. Winter light poured across the stone floor, and a line of royal guards marched inside with flawless precision, their polished armor reflecting silver beneath the vaulted ceiling. Caleb Monroe entered first, his voice carrying through the silent hall with practiced authority. His Majesty, King Uriah Ashford. Instantly, every alpha bowed. Elders lowered their heads. Elder Tobias halted the ceremony before the first vow could be spoken. Gavin Whitmore stood motionless beside Brielle Langston, disbelief replacing the confident smile he had worn all morning. Greyhaven had never expected the Alpha King to attend a private wedding. Yet the greatest surprise had not entered the room. Not yet. A heartbeat later, another figure stepped through the doorway. Serena Mercer walked beside the king with quiet grace, wearing a midnight blue gown beneath a dark cloak fastened by her mother's silver laurel pendant. She wore no crown, no glittering jewels, and no expression of triumph. She simply carried herself with a calm dignity that no one in Greyhaven had ever allowed her to display. A stunned silence swept across the hall. "Is that Serena?" A woman breathed from the back row. "She came with the Alpha King," another whispered, unable to hide her amazement. Gavin's color drained almost instantly. The woman he had invited to witness his victory had entered beside the one man every alpha in the kingdom answered to. Marjorie Whitmore's carefully rehearsed composure cracked for the first time that day, while Brielle slowly shifted her attention from Serena to Gavin, quietly noticing that her fiancé had forgotten everyone else in the room. Uriah neither hurried Serena forward nor spoke on her behalf. He matched her pace exactly, allowing every eye in the hall to understand that she stood there because she had chosen to, not because anyone had rescued her. Together they walked down the center aisle until Elder Tobias stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," the elders said, "Greyhaven is honored beyond words by your presence." Uriah acknowledged the greeting with a slight inclination of his head. "I accepted an invitation extended within my kingdom." His answer sounded simple, but Serena understood its deeper meaning. He had come because one invitation had been written to celebrate a marriage, and another had been written to destroy someone's dignity. Gavin recovered enough to bow before the king. "This is an unexpected honor," he managed. "Had I known your Majesty intended to visit Greyhaven, greater preparations would have been made." Uriah regarded him calmly. "The finest preparation any host can offer is respect for every guest." The words landed with quiet precision. Gavin lowered his eyes, unable to answer. Serena felt dozens of curious gazes following her. Yet for the first time since the broken mate bond, those glances no longer defined who she was. Fear had once walked beside her into every room. Today, it remained outside those doors. Brielle approached Serena with measured courtesy. "May I ask you something?" she said gently. Serena nodded. "Did you know His Majesty before this week?" "No." Brielle looked briefly toward Uriah before returning her attention to Serena. "Then why would the Alpha King stand beside you?" Serena smiled with simple honesty. "Because kindness given without expectation is sometimes remembered longer than power." Brielle absorbed the answer in thoughtful silence. Across the hall, Marjorie watched the exchange with growing unease. The story she had carefully built, that Serena was merely the forgotten Omega clinging to a past that no longer mattered, was quietly falling apart before hundreds of witnesses without a single raised voice. Elder Tobias finally lifted the ceremonial staff once more. "If there are no further interruptions, we shall begin the sacred vows." Gavin turned reluctantly toward the altar, but his attention drifted one last time toward Serena. At that exact moment, the great doors burst open again. A royal courier rushed inside, breathless from hard riding, crossed the center aisle, and dropped to one knee before King Uriah. His voice echoed through the stunned hall. "Your Majesty, new evidence has been recovered regarding the attack on your life, and it directly concerns someone standing inside this ceremony." The royal courier's words swept through the ceremonial hall like a sudden winter gale, silencing every whisper before another vow could be spoken. Elder Tobias lowered the ceremonial staff, the sacred rite halted by authority no pact could ignore. Caleb accepted the sealed dispatch, examined the royal insignia, then handed it directly to King Uriah. The king's expression remained unreadable as he scanned the page, but the stillness in his eyes carried greater weight than anger ever could. Gavin shifted uneasily beside Brielle. Marjorie's confident posture stiffened. Every guest sensed that the celebration had crossed into something far beyond a wedding. Uriah folded the document with deliberate care before lifting his gaze toward the gathering. The attack against the crown was carried out by hired blades, he said evenly. Their employer remains unidentified. However, testimony taken from a surviving mercenary confirms one important fact. The assassins were instructed to pass through Greyhaven without interference because they had been promised assistance from someone connected to this territory. A wave of disbelief rippled through the hall. No accusation had been spoken, yet suspicion settled over everyone present. Gavin stepped forward, forcing calm into his voice. Your Majesty, Greyhaven has always been loyal to the crown. Loyalty is measured by truth, Uriah replied, not reputation. Before the silence could deepen further, Gavin's frustration turned toward the one person whose arrival had already unraveled his carefully planned day. This is because of her, isn't it? He pointed toward Serena. Ever since she appeared beside you, everything has become a spectacle. Serena met his eyes without retreating. I didn't come here to stop your wedding. Then why come at all? The question echoed through the chamber. For a heartbeat, the younger Serena, the one who would have apologized simply to end the confrontation, seemed close enough to remember. Instead, she answered with quiet certainty. Because I refused to spend the rest of my life believing I deserved to be humiliated. Her words landed harder than any shouted accusation. Several elders lowered their heads. Others remembered the handwritten line inside the invitation that had quietly circulated through Greyhaven after servants began talking. Brielle slowly turned toward Gavin. Did you really write that message? Gavin hesitated only an instant, but it was long enough. It was meant to close the past. Brielle's disappointment became impossible to hide. No, it was meant to wound someone who could no longer defend herself. Marjorie immediately stepped forward. Enough. This is our family's private matter. Uriah's voice interrupted her without rising. Not when public humiliation is used against one of the crown's citizens. The hall fell silent once more. He looked toward Serena before addressing everyone else. This woman found me dying in the northern forest. She did not know my name, my rank, or the reward that might follow. She chose compassion when abandoning me would have been easier. I stand here today because of her character, not because of chance. Gasps spread through the assembled guests. Gavin stared at Serena as though seeing a stranger. He remembered every moment he had dismissed her kindness as weakness. Every occasion he believed ambition mattered more than loyalty. For the first time, certainty abandoned him. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked hoarsely. Serena's answer came without bitterness. Because saving a life isn't something you bargain with. Brielle closed her eyes briefly, then removed her hand from Gavin's arm. The distance between them, though no more than a single step, felt impossible to cross. I agreed to marry a man willing to make difficult choices, she said quietly. I never agreed to marry someone who needed another woman's suffering to prove he had chosen correctly. Elder Tobias lowered his head. These vows cannot continue while such matters remain unresolved. Gavin reached toward Brielle, but she stepped back. The ceremony had not been destroyed by Serena's arrival. It had collapsed beneath truths no one could continue ignoring. Across the chamber, Serena quietly reached into her satchel and withdrew the small linen pouch she had carried since leaving the hunting lodge. Without hesitation, she opened it, revealing the fated mate ring she had protected for an entire year. She walked to Gavin, placed it gently into his trembling hand, and closed his fingers around it. You were right about one thing, she said softly. That bond ended long ago. I was simply the last person ready to let it go. She turned away before he could answer. Yet as she returned toward Uriah, an elderly messenger forced his way through the crowd, carrying another sealed report from the royal investigators. His face had gone pale. Your Majesty, he whispered urgently, we've identified the Greyhaven noble who secretly met with the mercenaries, and the name will change far more than today's wedding. The elderly messenger stopped only a few steps from King Uriah before lowering himself to one knee, his trembling hands presenting the sealed report. Caleb broke the wax, scanned the final page, then silently passed it to the king. Around them, no one dared move. Even the musicians had lowered their instruments. Uriah read the statement once before closing it with measured calm. The investigation confirms that the meeting with the mercenaries was arranged by a Greyhaven noble, he announced. The purpose was not to assassinate the crown, but to guarantee safe passage through these lands in exchange for political favors. The evidence identifies Lady Marjorie Whitmore. A sharp gasp swept across the chamber. Marjorie staggered backward, disbelief flashing across her face before pride quickly returned. "That is absurd," she said. "I never ordered anyone to harm the king." Uriah met her eyes without raising his voice. "The report does not claim that you did. It states you authorized unknown armed travelers to cross Greyhaven without inspection because they promised future alliances benefiting your family. You chose influence over duty. The distinction changed everything. Her ambition had not created the attack, yet it had opened the gate through which danger entered." Gavin stared at his mother as though seeing her for the first time. "Tell me it isn't true." She reached toward him. "Everything I did was to secure your future." He slowly stepped away instead. "You taught me that victory mattered more than decency." His words were quiet, but they carried farther than any shout. Brielle removed the engagement bracelet from her wrist and placed it upon the ceremonial altar. No dramatic speech followed. She simply looked at Gavin with tired honesty. A marriage cannot begin while trust is already broken. Then she turned and walked out of the hall with her family's delegation following behind. No one tried to stop her. Elder Tobias rested both hands upon the ceremonial staff. "By the authority entrusted to me, today's rite is suspended." The declaration echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, bringing the gathering to its inevitable end. Servants quietly extinguished candles. Visiting guests departed in thoughtful silence instead of celebration. Greyhaven had expected to witness the birth of a powerful alliance. Instead, it had watched long-hidden choices reveal their cost. Gavin remained standing near the altar, the fated mate ring still enclosed within his hand. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to remember the woman he had once claimed to love. Not the rejected Omega everyone whispered about, but the young healer who had sat beside his father's bed through endless winter nights without asking for payment, who had stayed behind after every festival to help elders return home safely, and who had believed that loyalty mattered even when no one was watching. None of those memories had disappeared. Only his ability to value them had. He looked toward Serena, standing quietly beside the Alpha King, and finally understood that he had not lost her because she had changed. He had lost her because he had mistaken kindness for weakness until it was far too late. "I'm sorry," he said, the words carrying no expectation of forgiveness, only the weight of truth finally accepted. Serena paused, but did not turn around. "Thank you for saying it. I hope one day you become the man you believed you already were." Nothing more needed to be said. She continued toward the entrance, carrying neither resentment nor triumph. Outside, fresh snow had begun covering the footprints left by arriving carriages. Uriah stood beneath the stone archway, watching the quiet courtyard. When Serena joined him, he offered his cloak against the cold without a word. She accepted it with a grateful smile. Together, they watched Brielle's procession disappear beyond the gates. "She'll find her own path," Serena said softly. "So will Gavin," Uriah replied. "Whether he chooses to learn from today is no longer your burden." Serena looked across Greyhaven, realizing every place that once reminded her of loss now felt strangely smaller than before. The village had not changed. She had. Caleb approached, carrying the royal decree Serena had received days earlier. "Your Majesty," he said, "the council has completed preparations." Uriah nodded, then turned toward Serena. "When you first treated me, you asked for nothing. Even now, I won't decide your future for you." From inside his coat, he withdrew a second sealed document and placed it gently into her hands. "This is an appointment to serve as royal healer, should you freely choose to accept it." Serena stared at the parchment, overcome not by its honor but by the freedom it represented. For the first time in years, every road before her had been opened by possibility instead of fear. She looked up, meeting Uriah's steady gaze. Before she could answer, the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the snow-covered courtyard, and she understood that her next words would not simply begin another chapter. They would decide the life waiting beyond everything she had finally left behind. Serena looked at the royal appointment for a long moment before carefully folding it and placing it back into Uriah Ashford's hands. For an instant, even Caleb wondered whether she intended to refuse. Uriah's expression never changed. He had promised himself in the northern forest that if Serena ever chose a future beside him, it would be because she wanted it, not because gratitude, loneliness, or admiration had quietly become another form of obligation. "I can't answer today," Serena said softly. "Not because I don't know where my heart is leading me, but because for too long, every important decision in my life belonged to someone else." Uriah inclined his head with genuine respect. "Then your first completely free choice deserves all the time it needs." It was such a simple response, yet it revealed everything Gavin had never understood. Real strength never demanded an answer before someone was ready to give it. Over the following days, Greyhaven slowly returned to ordinary life. The grand decorations disappeared from the village square. The ceremonial hall stood empty. Conversations that had once celebrated political advantage gradually turned into quieter reflections about dignity, loyalty, and the price of ambition. Elder Tobias formally declared Gavin Whitmore's wedding dissolved under pack law, while the Royal Council accepted Marjorie Whitmore's resignation from public leadership before beginning judgment over her reckless decision to grant armed strangers passage through Greyhaven without proper inspection. Her downfall came not from hatred, but from placing influence above responsibility. Brielle Langston returned to Silvercrest with her family, leaving behind neither bitterness nor revenge. She chose peace over a marriage built upon uncertainty, proving that courage sometimes meant walking away before a promise became a prison. Gavin remained in Greyhaven. Weeks later, he visited the old moonstone where he and Serena had once believed destiny alone could guarantee happiness. The fated mate ring rested in his palm one final time before he placed it upon the weathered stone and stepped back. He neither searched for Serena nor asked for another chance. Some mistakes could not be repaired by finding the person you had wounded. They could only be honored by becoming someone who would never make them again. On the first morning of spring, Serena stood outside the little cottage where so much of her life had begun. Rosalie adjusted the silver laurel pendant around her neck, smiling through grateful eyes. "Your mother always believed kindness would find its way home," she whispered. "Perhaps it finally has." Before Serena could answer, the familiar sound of horses approached along the country road. Caleb dismounted first. Though this time there were no urgent reports, no soldiers preparing for danger, and no royal ceremony waiting beyond the horizon. Uriah walked the remaining distance alone. He wore no formal cloak, only a simple dark coat that made him look less like a king and more like the man Serena had once found bleeding beneath snow-covered pines. She smiled before either of them spoke. "You came without an escort announcing your name." A quiet laugh escaped him. "I hoped that, just this once, Uriah would arrive before the Alpha King." She reached into her satchel and withdrew the unopened royal appointment. This time she placed it back into his hands without hesitation. "I've made my decision." He waited patiently. "I'll accept the position of royal healer," she said. "Not because I need a new beginning, but because I've already found one." Uriah looked at her for a long moment before asking the only question that still mattered. "May I earn a place in that future? Not as your king, not because fate expects it, but as the man who wants to spend the rest of his life proving that your kindness was never weakness?" Serena felt tears gather, not from sorrow, but from the quiet certainty that no one was trying to claim her. He was asking for the privilege of being chosen. She placed her hand in his. "You already began earning it the day you gave me back my choice." They walked side by side toward the waiting horses, neither leading nor following the other. Behind them, Greyhaven faded into the distance, taking with it the memories of a wedding meant to humiliate an Omega who was never supposed to stand tall again. Ahead stretched an open road untouched by footprints, where every step belonged to two people who had learned that love could never grow from power alone. The greatest miracle had never been that Serena walked into another woman's wedding beside the Alpha King. It was that she walked away with something no one else could ever give or take from her again, her own worth. And only after finding that, she discovered a love worthy of walking beside for the rest of her life.